A gute Woche. It was a relative short of Farbrengen this afternoon. No. Farbrengen finished before 3. And we'll go over briefly the two siches the Rebbe spoke this afternoon. The Rebbe began the Farbrengen with this week's Sedre, Vayera Elav Hashem, that the Rebbe revealed himself to Avram Avinu, appeared to Avram Avinu, came to visit him when Avram was ill after he was circumcised after the meal. Being that this is the beginning of the Sedra, it's general, something which is very klolistic in the entire Sedra, especially when we're talking about the Ovis. So it's definitely something which is klolistic, something very general, and particularly based on the expression of Chazal, Maisa Ovis Simen Labonim. Whatever has happened to the Ovis is a Simen. Labonim is the Rebbe went on to explain, it's an Esinas Koyach, it's a source of strength, that the same thing will also be able to happen to the Bonim, to the children, as each and every Yid is called a Ben Avram, Yitzchak, V'Yakov. And mentioning the expression, Maisa Ovis Simen Labonim, the Rebbe went into a lengthy explanation, what is the taich of a simin? The expression simin is used as a means of identification. Especially when we mention the word simin, the Gemara in Bava Metzia right away comes to our mind. And there the Gemara discusses when one loses something and somebody else finds it, there's an union of a simin. There are ways of identifying it by giving a certain sign, certain means of identification in this item, in the object. So there are really two kinds of simonim. There's a kind of simin which the simin really does not deal with the directly with the object, but it's just something surrounding the object, and that is how we identify this. So for example, I think with the best example we could probably give the Gemara when the Gemara discusses in Bava Metzia items that are being lost and somebody else finds it. The Gemara talks when a loaf of bread is lost, and we identify this loaf of bread by the fact that it had some coins in the bag right next to it. So the coins really do not affect the bread in any way. The bread is a bread and the coins are coins, but the only thing is, how do we identify that this is the lost bread? Because there are some coins right next to it or within it, part in the same bag, in the same wrapper. However, there's a deeper way of a simin, a much stronger simin. There is a simin, as the Rebbe expressed himself, which when somebody creates something, and the koyach hapoyel benifal, the koyach of the creator, when somebody tries to put together something, and he makes certain simanim in the thing which he's putting together, and then the simanim are really part and parcel of the object. This is a much deeper type of a siman. And again the same, when we are talking Maisa Ovis Simen Labonim, we do not mean siman just as a means of identification in a very exterior type of way. We mean Maisa Ovis Simen Labonim, where it really becomes the siman becomes part and parcel of the thing. The Rebbe brought an example. Find in Chumash that when Avram Avinu was walking through Eretz Yisrael, the land and width of Eretz Yisrael, this was a kinyan, this was an act of him acquiring Eretz Yisrael, so that in later years Eretz Yisrael will belong to his children. So again, this kinyan, which came as an expression of him walking back and forth in Eretz Yisrael, of the land, this is something which affected the kinyan, the acquiring of Eretz Yisrael. It had a direct effect on it. It's not like a side effect. Or, for example, the pasuk, the Rebbe says, Ki yedaitiv. He's expressing love to Avraham Avinu, Lamana sheyitzavez bonov es beis Yaakov, because he will instruct his children and his family afterwards, Vishamru derech Hashem, that they will follow the path of the Rebbe. So again, this love that's expressed to Avraham, because Avraham instructed his family that they will follow the path of the Rebbe. And what did Avraham instruct his children? What was Avraham symbolic for? For the Indian of Chesed. The chesed which Avram acted, the Indian of Gemilas chesed, which Avram was so closely identified with, this is what he related to his children as well. And that is what we say. Chazal say that there are 3 simonim on Yidin. Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Goim Lechasadim. Every Yid has to have the midah of Rachmanis within him, the midah of Baishanis, of Shemevdik, being of shame within himself, and the midah of Gemilas Chesed. And this is an identification of a Yid. So the Rebbe is teaching, when we say that the Yid has these three midas, so the Gemilas Chesed is not just a fact that through this, if he has Gemilas Chesed, we identify this is a kind of an exterior siman that he's a Yid. It's more than that. If he's lacking Gemilas Chesed, that means he's lacking Yiddishkeit. Gemilas Chesed is so. When the Gemara says that a Yid has to have within himself these three midas, and now that we're talking about Gemilas Chesed, this is something which comes as an inheritance of Avraham Avinu. This has to be part of Yiddishkeit is that a Yid should possess this midah of Gemilas Chesed, as it was expressed by Avraham, not only in Gemilas Chesed, the way he was going to help after people, but it expressed itself in all different ways. It expressed itself in Achnosas Orchim, and that is how we know the heavy involvement of Avraham Avinu in Achnosas Orchim to such an extent that here in this week's Sedra we learn how the Rebbe made it extremely hot so that Avraham Avinu should not be bothered with any guest. And Avraham had tsar of that. Avraham felt bad of that. Why? Because Avraham was so verkocht in Achnosas Orchim. This was Avraham's inyan. Avraham was seeking to do chesed in any way possible. And when one seeks to do chesed in all ways possible, it became part of Avraham. But concluded, the Vayera, the lesson which we derive from this. Not always we have to feed somebody who is hungry with food. Sometimes there's a hunger which is not for food. Roiv loila lechem. And Somei v'loila mayim. There are those that are hungry, but not for lechem. Those that are thirsty, but not for water. What is the hunger for? The hunger and thirst is for Dvar Hashem, for Torah. The lesson which we derive from this, the Maisa of is similar banim. Vayera Elov Hashem. The Rebbe appeared Elov to him. Pasuk doesn't use the expression that the Rebbe appeared to Abraham. Pasuk's talking about him, Avraham. Taka means Avraham, but the Pasuk says, how does the Pasuk use the expression Vayera Elov? The Rebbe appeared to him. What's the type the Rebbe appeared to him? He's appearing to him because of what made him. What made him his chesed? What was so extraordinary in Avraham? What was the specialty of Avraham? The specialty of Avraham was his chesed. Memele, the Maisa of a similar banim is that the Rebbe is appearing to each and every Yid as well. And why? Mitzad what is the Rebbe appearing to every Yid? Because every Yid has to possess this Elov. What made Avraham inherited to every Yid. The koch and the gishmak, in inyanim of Gemilas Chesed, in inyanim of helping another Yid, the inyan of Achnosas Orchim. All of this has to be part of every Yid. And here the Rebbe says, Achnosas Orchim doesn't necessarily mean, when we're talking about helping Yidden, when they're hungry for a meal. Avada, that's also Achnosas Orchim. But there's the hunger not to food and the thirst not to water, but the hunger and thirst to the Dvar Hashem. And that means simply to help Yidden gain knowledge in Torah. Help Yidden with gaining knowledge in Chassidus. The Rabbi used the expression, outreaching into the Chutzah, to take the Mayon, the well of Chassidus, and take the Mayon itself, and with the Mayon of the well of Chassidus, to reach out to the Chutzah all the way out, to those Yidden that as yet have no Shaykhs to Chassidus, and bring Chassidus to them, as well as helping Yidden with a Shir and Nigla the Torah, as well as helping Yidden with a Shir and Halacha. And an Inyan Shahazman Gram is something which is practical to mention in this time. For example, the Rebbe mentioned helping Yidden with halachas, knowing halachas of Hilchas Shabbos. Making shiurim for Yidden. And by making shiurim, this is also an act of Achnosas Orchim. When we share our knowledge with another Yid, we help whatever we know. We share this with another Yid. This is also an Inyan of Achnosas Orchim. We are feeding him. What are we feeding him? We're feeding him with Torah, which is also compared to food. Ruchnistika food. Ruchnistika food in the sense, on all levels of Torah, Nigla, Chassidus, and whatever the person may need, we have to be ready to help him with. And here the Rebbe says, it's customary always to mention a Rashi in the Chazarah. Lately the Rebbe always relates to the first Rashi. First Rashi in this week's Chazarah is very, very much not understood. There's an entire Inyan in this Chazarah which is not understood. As we just mentioned, the Rebbe appeared to visit Avraham Avinu. Why was he visiting him? Because Avraham was ill. As Rashi tells us, Levaker es ha'choila. The Rebbe came to him, he came to visit the sick. Omar Rab Chama bar Chanina, so there's a quotation which Rashi quotes from Gemara on behalf of Rab Chama bar Chanina, that day, Yom Shlishi Lemilase Haya. It was the third day since Avram's circumcision. Oba HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'shal b'shloimei. So the Rebbe came and the Rebbe asked how he's feeling. So the Rebbe says the reason we are teaching that way, Vayera Elav Hashem, because this comes in continuation to the previous Chazarah. In previous Chazarah we learned how Avram was Zichmal. Not only was he Mal himself, but he also was Mal Yishmael, and he was also Mal all of Kinyan Kaspoy, not Miknas Kesef. In other words, which obviously means all the slaves that Avram had ownership over, all of them went through circumcision. So being that in the previous Chazarah we already learned that the Rebbe appeared to Avram, so this is an indication that this is a second appearance. This is not the appearance where the Rebbe was with him. When Avram was Mal himself, this is something separate. What's the pshat? This is something separate. So that is why Rashi is bringing a taich that when did this happen? This happened Shlishi Lemilosei. This happened on the third day of his circumcision, and the Rebbe is coming to visit. But what we derive from the psukim is that Vayera sich mal gewen, not only Avram, not we derive, the pasuk says it beferish, not only Avram, but together with him Yishmael, and together with him anyone that was owned by Avram, they were all sich mal. If we go right into the Chazarah, we read how the three Malachim came to Avram, and again Avram tried to serve them the best. So again we see, Rabbi stresses, again we see how Avram went out of his way to excel in the mitzvah of Achnos HaSorchim, which again shows us how Avram went out of his way to do an act of chesed. But what does the pasuk tell us? Weiter in pasuk Zayin there's an expression. Avram ran to the sheep. Vayiten el hana. Whom did he give to help him? He gave it to the na. Who is this na? Who is this yingel? So Rashi comments this was Yishmael. And Rashi even adds on the words, Kedei lachanchoi b'mitzvahs. He wanted to bring him in, he wanted to instill in him a warmth to do mitzvahs. That's a very strong question. Yishmael was circumcised the same day as Avram. Avram was weak to such an extent that the Rebbe had to come to visit him, and that the Rebbe did not want Avram to be bothered with Oichem. So that's why the Rebbe took the sun out of its cape, and it made an unusual hot day so that people should not walk the streets that day. So just like Avram was weak, Yishmael was also weak. So Avram did not have...
He was much younger.
But nonetheless, he was a 13-year-old that went through Mila just 2 days ago. So Avram did not have anybody else whom to pick on for help. So the Rebbe is strengthening the question. But all the slaves that were in Avram's house, they would also all come out. So they also couldn't. But if Avram owned slaves, he obviously had shvachis as well. He had female slaves, servants also, maids also. So he could have involved the maid that they should have given a hand and help out at this occasion when he had to serve the guest. Why did he have to involve the na? Furthermore, in Pshut Shel Mikra, we are learning that the Rebbe is coming to visit Avram because Avram was weak. Why was he weak? He was weak from the Milah. If Avram was weak from the Milah, Avram was not the only one that was Chmal on that day. Avram had, as we were just discussing, Avram had Yishmael and he had Miknas Kesef, Yelid Boy. Cholan Shebeisei, the pasuk concludes in Pashas Lech Lecha. Every one of his household, Yelid Boy is a Miknas Kesef, which obviously all this refers to everyone which was owned by Avram, including Yishmael and including all his servants. Why didn't the Rebbe visit everyone else? If the Rebbe is being Mevakir Choyla here, being Mevakir Choyla to the people that followed his instruction, all these adults that went through Milah, why only Avram? Especially they were all there. Nonetheless, we see whom is the Rebbe visiting. The Rebbe is visiting Avram here. These were the questions which the Rebbe discussed in the Farbrengen, but the Rebbe did not answer these questions. In the Farbrengen, the Rebbe continued based on the famous expression Shabbos minei mizboch in kuli yomin, that Shabbos gives bracha into the entire week, especially when we're talking about something which is going to take place this week, which is in the first half of the week. And the first half of the week has a very obvious shaykhus to Shabbos.
first half of the week. Al pi halach, even if one forgot to make Havdalah, he could make Havdalah till Tuesdays. This shows us that the first half of the week has a strong shaykhus to Shabbos. Excuse me, which is this Monday. Monday is 20 days in the month of Cheshvan. Chav Cheshvan is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. Birthday is the day of Mazlei Goiver, so they when one's mazel strengthens, and when we think about the Rebbe Rashab, it immediately comes to our mind what was one of his major accomplishments was the fact that he founded the yeshiva Tomchet Mimim. So we all know it was during some Chazarah HaKofis, that is when he named it with this name Tomchet Mimim. Though the Rebbe Rashab did many things, many acts of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim, many of them that are still alive today, directly or indirectly, the fruits, peiros and peirosein of his acts, the fruits of his acts that are still around. But nonetheless, none of this compares to the inyan of Tomchet Mimim, which is a living thing, which was founded by the Rebbe Rashab and is with us today as well. In other words, there's a binyan, being that there's a binyan, there's a building which accommodates Tomchet Mimim. Every Tomchet Mimim, wherever they are located, the main yeshiva Tomchet Mimim, and the branches of the yeshivas Tomchet Mimim, and these yeshivas Tomchet Mimim are a living remembrance of the Rebbe Rashab, and what is done in a house of Tomchet Mimim, it's a house of Torah, and a house of Tefillah, and a house of Tzedakah. It's a house where Torah is learned. It's a house of Tefillah, as we know how the Rebbe Rashab at Tomchet Mimim stresses the importance of Tefillah. And naturally also together with it, it's a house of Tzedakah. Acts of Tzedakah and acts of Gemilas Chesed. The Rebbe is mentioning this inyan of a binyan, of a building. So this is coming in continuity, which the Rebbe has been talking recently, how when a Meisid has its own binyan, when a Meisid has its own building, when a Meisid can be much more successful. In other words, it's more of a kind of a living monument, a living and ongoing activities are usually expressed in a much stronger way when the Meisid has its own building. So, he was also stressing the union of the binyanim, the buildings of Tomchet Mimim. And therefore the Rebbe says, what would be advisable to do on this day of Chav Cheshvan is to go into these buildings of Tomchet Mimim. This should be done here, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, where Eretz Yisrael we know there's an extra amount of hashra, of getlichkeit, is in Eretz Yisrael, but here as well, to go into the binyanim of Tomchet Mimim, and in the binyanim of Tomchet Mimim, to do an act of Torah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah. In other words, to learn an inyan of Torah as well as to give Tzedakah. Tzedakah could be given, and tie the giving of Tzedakah in for the schus of the Rebbe Rashab. The Tzedakah could also be given towards the meisters of the Rebbe Rashab, and also to learn Torah. And it's especially advisable the Torah should be in his Torah, in the Mamorim of the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe also suggested that we know that one of the famous Mamorim of the Rebbe Rashab is the Maimer Cholzu. And the Maimer Cholzu stresses the importance of Avas Yisrael. Cholzu mitchem anoshim, and go ahead to choose people amongst us, anoshim, and we'll explain what the meaning of anoshim. It's a madreg of ish, people. And in that Maimer, as mentioned, he stresses the meaning of Avas Yisrael. Talking about Avas Yisrael, the Rebbe also mentions, we say, in the beginning of davening, we always say, Hareini mikabel alai mitzvahs aseichel v'havta l'reyacha kamoicha. Before we begin davening, we accept upon us to fulfill the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael. We accept that upon ourselves. We say it in the morning, which really it relates that all acts that we do during the day should be such acts where we express Avas Yisrael. The inyanim that we do during the day, we always have to think how we can help out another Yid during the day. During the day we have to think, what could we do now to help another Yid? So the Rebbe is tying this also in to help out other Yidden by bringing them also into the binyanim of them Chetmimim, into the building of them Chetmimim, and we use the expression, and these Dalet Ames, in the word the Rebbe was referring to the binyan of 770, which this is also Tem Chetmimim is, where Bacham sit and learn, and to utilize this day of Chav Cheshvan for an Indian of Torah, and relating to the teachings, to the Torahs of the Rebbe Rashab, and as mentioned particularly in the Maimah Hecholzu, this is a Maimah which the Rebbe Rashab said it several times, and later it was publicized in the days of the Rebbe Rashab, and later the Frierdiker Rebbe also suggested to print this Maimah. It was printed here in the United States through the Frierdiker Rebbe, and since then it was also printed several other editions. In fact, it was last year Chav Cheshvan when the Rebbe gave everyone Hecholzu. So it's also advisable to utilize this day for learning to learn it. Remember to correctly use the expression, at least to learn a few lines in the Maimah of Hecholzu. The Rebbe concluded this Sikha as it's customary that there are those that give in mashke before the Farbrengen, and the reason for their giving in mashke is that in their respective places they will have an Indian of a Hanukkah Sabayis, starting a new building, founding of a new building, or any other special thing which will take place, or any other special event which will take place at their respective places. So let them come up and they will give the mashke, they will announce whatever this is for, and they will invite everybody to participate. Towards the end of the Farbrengen, if the mashke and the Rebbe, after the mashke usually the Rebbe begins singing Varakesi Lochem Bracha, and afterwards the Rebbe also said to sing a nigun that relates to the Rebbe Rashab. And there's always, for every one of the Chabbeim, there's a nigun which was sung often by the Rebbe Rashab, kind of like the Rebbe Rashab expressed chavivus to this nigun, extra interest to this nigun, extra love to this nigun, and the Rebbe asked that this nigun be sung.
Listen, there's a kollel that's been formed at Frankel Shul. We meet between 8 and 10, 4 nights a week. It's a paying kollel, paying $200 a month.
You don't have to pay.
And you don't have to pay. It's a paying kollel. Mortal Schusterman is Rosh Kollel, and Akiva Greenberg is Maggid Shir and Gemara. It's a kollel to help people who really are, you know, from the Bali Tshuva community, guys who are married and who are working, but who really have a problem, have never really broken through in learning. So this is an opportunity to really learn. For everybody, I mean, everything's touched out, and everybody has a chance to read, and it's chavrusa, and it's shir, and it's work. Everybody's working to come to the madrega that they, Meretz Hashem, be able to teach their own and chavrusa with their own children when they're of that age. So, but if you're not part of kollel, at least, and you can't come 4 nights a week, at least come to Shirim or Givaldik. The Gemara Shir is Monday, Wednesday evening from 8 to 10 with Chavrusa. Franklin Shul, 1699 president, and Mortal Schusterman was just a pleasure, and halacha is great, and he's a Balkri at 770. He teaches halacha, and also we're learning trup.
Teaching trup?
Well, he made a tape. He made a tape, and over the year, it's a worthwhile situation. Anybody's interested in learning. From 8 to 10, 4 nights a week.
Well, Monday through Thursday?
Monday through Thursday, but you have to be married. You can come and learn, but kollel is married, especially Balabatim. Meretz Hashem this year should join the kollel.
I didn't catch your answer as to why he chose Yishmael to help him out.
That remained unanswered.
Oh, I see. That's why he